Okay. Um, so metabolism and fluid balance. So there's a few slides that were left out from the previous lecture. So we're going to go over these today, and then after that we'll get into the topic of fluid balance. So if you remember in the lecture number 6, we were talking about how the different macronutrients will be used to produce energy, right? For example, triacylglycerides will be broken down and then oxidized, and their fatty acids will be oxidized to produce energy, right? Carbohydrates, either under anaerobic or aerobic conditions, will either go to produce lactic acid, which produces energy, or they will be used in the TCA cycle and then in oxphos to produce energy. And same thing goes for proteins, right? We remember proteins can be converted into glucose through glucogenesis. But today, for the remainder of the metabolism topic, we're going to talk about the opposite process, which is the process of building things. And so instead of breaking down things, we'll be building them. And so the body can produce many of the macronutrients, and it does so through various pathways or signaling pathways or processes. One of them, for example, is gluconeogenesis, which is the process of building new glucose from non-glucose substrates. So for example, proteins or triglycerides. And if the body sees that you have not eaten for a while and that there is no glucose in the blood, or very low glucose in the blood, I should say, then it's going to start using up the body's stores of fat and proteins to produce the glucose. And it's able to do so by converting, in the case of triacylglycerides, glycerol into glucose, while for proteins, there's a few amino acids that are glucogenic, and these amino acids will be converted into glucose, not the ketogenic amino acids. These ones will be used to produce lipids. Okay, so there's a distinction here, and this is just based on the differences in their structure. The ketogenic amino acids resemble more the triglycerides, or actually at least the components of triglycerides, while glucogenic amino acids resemble more glucose. There's another process that produces macronutrients. It's called lipogenesis, or de novo synthesis of lipids. And so your body can pretty much use anything to produce lipids. That's why they serve as the storage form of energy, of nutrients. And this is why if you overeat any of the things listed here, you probably will gain weight, because excess of them is converted into triglycerides. For example, so if you eat too much sugar, part of it will undergo glycolysis and will be used to produce energy. The excess will be used to produce glycogen, and when you have too much glycogen, the remainder will be used to produce triacylglycerides. And as we mentioned last lecture, everything happens through the acetyl-CoA crossroad, let's say, because it's at the center of metabolism, let's say. If you're eating too much proteins, those proteins, the excess proteins, will be converted into triacylglycerides, but in this case we'll be using ketogenic amino acids, not the glucogenic amino acids. The ketogenic amino acids, they resemble acetyl-CoA, that's why they will be converted into acetyl-CoA. Okay? And then the acetyl-CoA can be used to make fatty acids. If you remember, acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule with a CoA attached to it, and then if you remember in the slides, you can convert this into the carbon chain of fatty acids. Okay? What else? Drinking too much alcohol also can lead to gaining weight, to an increase in the levels of triglycerides, because alcohols, they are basically just a carbon-oxygen-hydrogen backbone, and so they resemble acetyl-CoA, and they can be converted into acetyl-CoA, as we've seen previously. Okay? So when these fatty acids are produced, they will then just combine with glycerol, and they can produce triacylglycerides, which are going to be shipped to your adipose tissue. Okay? All this happens in the liver. You can also make amino acids, so not necessarily just you know lipids or carbohydrates. And to make amino acids, you can use a process called transamination. And so your body um, requires 9 essential amino acids to be found in your diet. Those 9 amino acids can then be converted into the remaining 11 that are non-essential. And this happens through the process of transamination. So let's say, for example, you take an essential amino acid, I don't know, maybe methionine, and methionine, you have too much of it. So now the remainder or the excess methionine will be transaminated. That means the amine group from it will be transferred to a molecule called a keto acid. And if you remember from previous lectures, the keto acid structure resembles that of amino acids. It's just missing the amine group. So then, for example, uh, if you take the methionine, you remove the amine group and you transfer it to a keto acid, that keto acid becomes an amino acid. Okay, and this process is called transamination. In terms of hormones, since we've been talking about hormones, what's important to know about hormones is that they either act as anabolic or catabolic. I mean, not either, but in general, they have a catabolic or anabolic effect. And this is kind of simple to understand, right? So insulin signals your brain that there's too much glucose and too much amino acids. Like basically you just ate. And so if you just ate, your body knows that it has the components to build bigger molecules and more complex molecules. So this is an anabolic overall effect. Insulin has an overall anabolic effect. Obviously, if you haven't eaten for a while, then you don't have food in your stomach or digestive system, and so your body will basically signal to the brain, there's no food, but we need energy, and we need energy quickly. And so what will the body do? It will secrete glucagon, which will tell the remainder of your body, which will tell itself, that let's start breaking things that we have already in the system to use that as energy. So this is a catabolic effect. And you can see for the other two, like exercise, for example, exercise uses energy. Because you require energy, then epinephrine, which is released while you're doing exercise, will have a catabolic effect. Cortisol, this is stress, same thing, has a catabolic effect. Okay. Just understand that there are hormones that are anabolic and others that are catabolic. Maybe learn these, but no need to. I mean, you can probably deduct what they do because we've talked about all of them, right? In the carbohydrate section, for example. But no need to learn specifically what each one does on which proteins. So just the general effect, kind of. And so if you summarize this, what we've talked about, basically when you eat food, it's broken down into smaller pieces, into the macronutrients, single units, for example, glucose, amino acids, or glycerol and fatty acids. And these units are then either converted into each other, or they're used to produce energy, right? Glucose can be stored as glycogen, fatty acids can be stored as triglycerides. The only ones that don't have a storage form analogous to glycogen and triacylglycerides is the amino acids. So these ones get excreted. Okay. Fatty acids will be stored in adipose tissue, glycogen in liver and muscle, amino acids excreted. Okay. And you can see that they're all linked to each other. Just don't confuse this here because it might confuse you. Glucose has both an anabolic and catabolic effect, right? It can be it can be used in anabolism to produce glycogen, and it could be used in catabolism to produce energy from glycolysis, right? This is just a simplified diagram, let's say. Okay, so let's take a look at something which is more of a realistic scenario. So let's say, for example, you're eating. When you're eating, your bloodstream is rich with glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids, because you're basically just digesting the stuff and then transporting it and sending it into the bloodstream to be carried to different places. The first thing that happens is that glucose will be stored as glycogen. That's the excess glucose. When the glycogen stores are saturated, then your glucose will be stored as triglycerides. Okay. In terms of triglycerides, in terms of fatty acids will be directly stored as triglycerides, because you just ate a lot, right? So you already have glucose, you don't need to break this to produce energy. So you will have an anabolic effect where fatty acids will be converted into triglycerides and stored in adipose tissue. Additionally, amino acids are going to be deaminated, and the carbon skeletons will be converted to fatty acids, as we've seen, because these two need to be stored. Obviously, certain amino acids will be used to produce structural components of your cells. Fatty acids will be used to produce structural components of your cell, etc., right? But in general, the remainder, the excess, will be stored. If you're fasting, that means you didn't eat for a while, then your liver will start breaking down glycogen to replenish the glucose levels in the body. Most cells will switch to fatty acids to leave the glucose that's remaining in your body for the brain, because the brain prefers glucose. Red blood cells prefer glucose, right? And so the remainder of the body will be using fatty acids as fuel. And then glucose will be made from gluconeogenesis, right? Those gluconeogenic amino acids will be converted into glycerol. Okay. It will be converted into acetyl-CoA. Wait, what am I saying? The gluconeogenic amino acids will be converted into pyruvate, and glycerol can also be used to produce glucose. Right, this is this slide right here. Okay. Starving. This is when you haven't eaten for a few days. In this case, your blood glucose has to be maintained to support the brain and the red blood cells, because they prefer these sources. But because you're starting to basically use up your own body's molecules and macronutrients, proteins and lipids, and your stores are running low, then there's obviously the decline in activity that comes with it. Body temperature, because keeping you warm requires a lot of energy, and it's actually coupled to the mitochondrial function. And so if you don't have energy, then the body temperature, or molecules to be oxidized to produce energy, then obviously you don't have molecules to be oxidized to produce temperature, right? Your metabolic rate will decrease, because you don't have much to break or produce. Fatty acids will become as the primary fuel for sure. Your brain cells, starting to run low on glucose, will start using ketone bodies, and your muscle protein will start degrading over time, because you need to remake glucose, and so your muscle proteins will break down, producing glucogenic amino acids that will be converted into glucose. Okay. So, fluid balance. This is the actual lecture number 7. Fluids, quite simple. Your body is mostly made of fluids. Just basically, fluids can move freely and changeably whatever they want, and they will usually take the shape of the container. In cells, this is not 100% true. What happens is that water is controlled so that you don't have any problems with the structure or the shape of your cells, and also the transport of different molecules. And so in the cells, water does not move freely. It actually is contained. And in your body fluid is kind of complex. It's broken down into many different categories. You have your intracellular fluid, which is found inside the cells. You have which is about two-thirds of your body. fluids, you have extracellular fluid, which is the remaining third, and it's divided into two components. The first component is the interstitial fluid, which is the fluid between the cells, right? And then the plasma fluid, which is the water in the blood and the lymph, okay? And these are basically 80% for the interstitial fluid and 20% for the plasma fluid, okay? Obviously, if there's a disbalance between these, then you can start imagining that you have issues in keeping structure, in transporting blood, in transporting nutrients, in keeping cells homeostatic, let's say, right? And so fluids, what's important about fluids is that they're composed of these things called electrolytes, and these electrolytes allow for a certain gradient to be produced between inside and outside of the cell, and this allows for the movement of things, okay? And so the electrolytes are just substances that are, when they dissociate in solution, they will produce electrically charged particles called ions, and then the ions have a subdivision. Positively charged ions are called cations, and negatively charged ions are called anions. And these, you probably know, you've seen it since maybe CJEP chemistry or even before. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, these are positively charged ions. Chloride, bicarbonate, phosphate, these are negatively charged. And in the cell and outside the cell, they don't have the same concentrations, right? In the cell, you have more potassium and phosphate than outside of the cell, and in the extracellular fluid, you have more sodium and chloride. And this is important to keep this gradient because it allows for your body to regulate many processes. One of them is the action potential. Can you imagine if this was reversed? The action potential probably would not work, right? Let's see. So fluid composition changes between tissues, obviously. The reason for this is that the different tissues have different needs, but it also varies between these characteristics. So depending on the tissue, for example, as I said, if it's muscles, they will have a higher fluid content than fat, because muscles are more metabolically active, and so they require more fluid. Remember the hydrolysis condensation reactions, right? Fat is more of a storage tissue, and it's less metabolically active. Because of that, it requires less fluid. Sexes also have different body fluid compositions and amount, actually. Men tend to have more lean mass than women, and because of that, they have more body fluid, right? This is referring to this here. And then obviously age also affects that. As you grow up, you will start losing muscle mass. That's called sarcopenia. And because you're losing your lean tissue, then you're going to also lose body fluid. And so you'll decrease in the amount of body fluid you have in your body. There's just the subdivision. You can see that men have 60% of their body being fluids, while women is about 55%. Quite close, but the divisions remain the same. 2/3 of the fluids are intracellular, 1/3 is the extracellular, and the extracellular can be divided into two. The 80% which is for the interstitial fluid, and the 20% which is for the plasma. Okay. What are the functions? So there's 4 functions related to body fluids. The first one is that they help dissolve and transport substances. Water is an excellent solvent. It dissolves a variety of substances, and this is because of its property to be able to basically dissolve many things. There are polar and apolar solvents that are used in chemistry, for example, to dissolve lipids or other molecules. Water is at the middle of these, and so because of that, it acts as a great solvent, right? And so amino acids, glucose, vitamins, minerals, and medication usually are water soluble, and this allows for their transport into the bloodstream because of the plasma fluid. the only other molecule remaining of interest, let's say, is the fatty substances, and these are usually transported by molecules which turn the fatty substances into water soluble, or solubilize them, let's say. Okay, so this is very important to get nutrients to many places in your body. You need a great solvent, and this is where your body fluids come in, which are composed mostly of water. Blood volume. So one important thing about your fluids is the blood pressure. Okay, you want to keep your blood volume somewhat constant. If that changes, your blood pressure changes, and this just makes sense, right? If you have too much volume, it's going to push against the arteries and veins, and that can actually increase your blood pressure, and then that leads to basically a risk for heart disease and stroke, because you have hypertension, and hypertension can force your heart to work harder, and because it works harder, sometimes it will shut down and lead to a heart attack or stroke. Okay. Low blood pressure can lead you to feeling tired, confused, and dizzy. And if you have low blood pressure because of whatever that happened to you and it cannot go up, usually at the hospital they will give you epinephrine injections to bring back the blood pressure. Okay. The major organ that controls the body fluids in your body is the kidney. The kidney is the one that helps regulate the blood volume and the blood pressure. And so if you don't have healthy kidneys, this can lead to a lot of problems. Okay, so let me sit down properly because I have to explain this. So there are hormones and enzymes that are responsible for regulating the amount of body fluids. It's not just a random process. There's a few of them that are listed here. For example, the antidiuretic hormone, which stimulates the kidney to reabsorb water. So basically, your body either tells the kidney to excrete more water or less water to keep it kind of at the right amount. This is one of the hormones that is produced by the pituitary gland, which will tell your kidneys to reabsorb water. There's also the renin system, and this one I'll describe it in a second, but this will basically tell your body to release a vasoconstrictor which will increase blood pressure. So this renin system actually responds to decreased blood pressure. Okay. There's also the aldosterone hormone, which is produced by your adrenal glands, and this one will tell your kidneys to retain sodium and chloride to again increase blood pressure. Okay, so renin and aldosterone, they work together in this system here. Let me move this. There you go. So when the blood volume decreases, okay, let's say for example, I don't know, you've been working out too hard, and you've been sweating too much, or I don't know, you're dehydrated, whatever decreases the blood volume, your blood pressure will decrease at a certain point, okay, because there's less fluid in the plasma that will push against the wall, so your blood pressure decreases. This is dangerous because your heart can arrest if there is not enough pressure to pump blood in your body, and so your kidneys will react to this by secreting renin, and renin will convert angiotensinogen, which is a zymogen produced in the liver, into angiotensin 1, and angiotensin 1 is converted into angiotensin 2, and this will have two effects. Short term, it will induce vasoconstriction of red blood cells, vasoconstriction of blood vessels, and then this will increase your blood pressure. It will basically force your vessels to kind of shrink on themselves to increase blood pressure. The long-term effect of angiotensin, it will activate aldosterone, and aldosterone will be secreted from the adrenal glands, and it will tell your kidneys to reabsorb sodium and chloride and to reabsorb water, and this will lead to a decrease in urine output. So now you have more fluid, a higher plasma volume, and when you have a higher plasma volume, you will increase the blood pressure. Okay. Additionally, The concentration of solutes in your blood can also affect the antidiuretic hormone that I just talked about. This is why eating too much salt will affect your blood pressure. And so when you have a higher concentration of solutes in your blood, the antidiuretic hormone will be released from the pituitary gland, and this will lead to more water reabsorption by the kidneys. Now, when you have more water reabsorption by the kidneys, automatically you're increasing the blood volume, and if you're increasing the blood volume, this is going to lead to a higher blood pressure. Okay, this is why when you eat salt and it's broken down into sodium and chloride, this increases the solutes in your blood, and the body's way to react to this is by increasing the water in your plasma. Okay, this will increase blood volume and blood pressure. This is why it's dangerous to eat too much salt. Okay, question 1. Key organs necessary for regulating our fluid status. Well, that would be the liver, the kidneys, and the adrenal gland. The pancreas does not play any role in this, and the heart does not play a role in this. When a person has a tumor on the adrenal gland that produces excess aldosterone, what is the end result? Aldosterone, remember, increase water retention, increase sodium solute retention, and so that means you're going to have this answer here, B, increased water retention. Edema is an accumulation of fluid in the interstitial space. So edema, interstitial space. It's the water between the cells. Fluids can also help maintain your body temperature. So water has a high capacity for heat. That means it takes time to heat up water. And because it takes time to heat up water, then it's a good signal for your body to know that you've been overheating for a while, right? If you've tried to boil water, you will see that it takes a little bit of time before it starts boiling, compared to, let's say, certain metals where you could leave it like on the pan for 2 seconds and then just touch it and it's already extremely hot. Okay, so this capacity for heat then is able to tell your body we're overheating, time to kind of cool down, right? And so body fluids will serve in keeping the body temperature within a safe range. This is important because many enzymes don't work beyond certain temperatures. Proteins start to denature outside of this safe range, and so your body needs to control that, right? And the way it does so is that obviously you've probably seen this before. So this happens through sweating, and so when your body is overheating, it needs to release the heat, and one way to do it is to increase the blood flow from one warm place to the periphery, let's say your hands and your feet, which then will kind of start sweating and evaporate the water. And by evaporating the water, you will start cooling down the body. Okay. If you have cold hands or sweaty hands, you probably are aware of this. And so this happens through the blood, the plasma going from the core towards the extremities, which is basically, let's say, your hands, as I said. So when the plasma comes here, the water in it that is warm or too hot will be sent through the sweat glands and released on the skin. And when it gets released on the skin, what happens is that the sweat will evaporate, and when it evaporates, this cools down the body. Okay. And last but not least, fluids are also important for lubricating tissues. So, for example, the cerebrospinal fluid will protect your brain and the spinal cord. The amniotic fluid will protect the fetus. Synovial fluid lubricates joints. When you get older, this here decreases, and when it decreases, you end up with arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. Tears, saliva, obviously these are kind of clear. Tears lubricate your eyes. Saliva will moisten food for swallowing. Little interesting fact about research. When you're doing clinical studies, for example, and you're trying to study the effect of a drug on different parts of the body. Usually you will be extracting fluids and analyzing those fluids. Some of the fluids are more expensive than others. For example, your blood, pretty cheap. You can get it from any patient quite easily. But can you imagine collecting enough tears to study the effect of a drug on tears? This is one of the most expensive fluids to buy, biomedically speaking. So if you're doing research on tears, this is crazy. Okay, very hard to get by. Cerebrospinal fluid, not the best to extract. You need to go inside the spine and get it from there. Amniotic fluid, I'm not sure if this one is available for research or not, but this one is clearly the most rare of the fluids. Okay, a little bit about electrolytes. So electrolytes, you know it, you've seen it in chemistry, biochemistry. This is just a repetition of what I told you earlier, but basically they're substances that are found in solutions that when they dissociate from the solution, they produce these ions, cations and anions. Obviously, I'm calling it substances because they're not just atoms. They can be more complex than atoms. For example, phosphate or bicarbonate, right? And they have three functions in general. So they help regulate fluid balance. This we talked about. They help in action potentials, and so a response to stimuli for nerves. And then they also help muscles to contract. So, as you know, cell membranes are permeable to water, right? And so water can move across, but not the electrolytes. And so what happens is that water will usually follow by osmosis the solute. So if it's higher outside the cells, it will go outside the cells. Okay? If it's higher inside the cells, it will go inside the cells. And the balance of these will determine where the water is found. Okay? This is a way that the body kind of controls the movement of water. It's through these electrolytes. Okay? Osmosis, you've seen it before. Just if you take a porous membrane, put it into a cup like this, for example, add water to it, and then put salt on one of the sides, you will see that the water will go to this side, which has the higher concentration of solutes. Okay? Now, obviously, if you try this at home, it's not going to work. The reason for that is the membrane you're going to be using is probably has pores that are too big, and so you need something that is a membrane that is so tightly packed that even the salt cannot go through. And so obviously if you try this at home and it doesn't work, well, it's not because science doesn't work, but it's because you don't have the right membrane, and these membranes are quite expensive to make. Okay. Why is it important to keep a electrolyte balance across the cell membrane? Well, you don't want your cell to have too much solute or electrolyte in it. That will take all the water inside, and the cell risks bursting and can explode actually. In the opposite case, where you have not enough solute or electrolyte inside the cell, then water will leave because the concentration of electrolytes will be higher outside. This can lead to shrinkage of the cell, and this can also lead to breakdown of cell membrane. Okay, and you don't want this to happen to your red blood cells, for example, because that will affect their globular shape, and they'll kind of not be as good as they should be in transporting oxygen, for example. Okay. Function number 2, you know this. This is related to the nervous system. So nerve impulses require these electrolytes to be balanced across membranes. For example, you need sodium outside, potassium inside, etc. And so these are responsible for transmission of nerve impulses. Obviously, if you have deficiencies in sodium or potassium intake, well, clearly it's going to affect your nervous system, and so you'll see many things appear in your body related to your nervous system, for example. In this slide, all I want you to know is that sodium is mostly outside, potassium mostly inside, chloride mostly outside, phosphorus mostly inside. And so because of this gradient here, it will allow for the production of an electrical signal, and the electrical signal will happen through the movement of these electrolytes from one side to the other. Okay, I don't want you to remember the millivolts and which one moves inside and which one doesn't move inside. That's not related to nutrition and not related to the scope of this course. What's important to know for our purpose is that sodium and potassium need to be found in the diet at specific amounts because they dictate this process. And sodium is found mostly outside while potassium inside, and this is what allows for the generation of the action potential. Additionally, there's another electrolyte that is important for nerve impulses. It's calcium. Calcium, what it does is that when you have a presynaptic cell talking to a postsynaptic cell, you need neurotransmitters to pass and activate the postsynaptic cell. And so to release these neurotransmitters, calcium is important. So calcium is involved in the release of these vesicles here, or actually their fusion with the membrane and the release of their content outside. So if you don't have proper levels of calcium, this process here is broken down, and your vesicles will not be transported to the membrane, and they will not fuse with the membrane and release the neurotransmitters, which are important for continuing the action potential that is going inside the postsynaptic cell. Okay? Muscles, contraction. Additionally, on top of that, calcium has another role. Calcium plays a role in muscle contraction, and if you don't have enough calcium, and not only calcium, magnesium and many other electrolytes, but calcium is very important for muscle contraction. And so if you don't have that, what happens is that your muscles will start just spasming and not being able to, you'll get cramps, for example, right? And so you need calcium because it serves as a signal carrier, an electrical signal carrier that tells it contract. Okay. And so what is muscle contraction really? So I don't want you to get too much into detail with this. Just know that these are cytoskeleton filaments, so the actin filaments, and they're bound by myosin, and whenever there is an influx of calcium, the influx of calcium will kind of make this structure here move towards each other and kind of bridge them together. Okay? And this is just what muscle contraction is. It's these filaments that are brought to get closer together, and then when it relaxes, they're brought apart. And this process requires calcium influx and outflux of the cell. Okay? Going super fast here. So how does the body maintain this fluid balance? Well, there are a few processes, but mainly it comes back to intake and elimination of fluids, right? And so if you are, let's say for example, your body needs more fluids, it will signal to your brain to drink. Additionally, it will signal your brain to retain more fluids in the kidneys. If your body requires less fluid, then it will tell itself to, or signal to the brain to tell the body to excrete those fluids, and maybe even the electrolytes, right? So the drinking part, this is through the thirst mechanism, okay? And this happens in the hypothalamus, which tells us to basically tells the whole body to do the movements to basically go and drink water, and it's going to be stimulated by the concentration of salts in your body and other substances. This is why when you go and eat like a spoon of salt, you just want to drink. This is because these salts are signaling the hypothalamus, which tells your body it's time to drink water. There's too much salt, okay? Additionally, the thirst mechanism can be activated by a reduction in blood volume and blood pressure. This will signal your brain to drink, and when you drink water, that increases the plasma volume, and if you increase the plasma volume, you bring the blood pressure up. This happens usually when you're, for example, sweating, or when you have some sort of GI issue like vomiting, diarrhea, or when you're just not drinking. Okay. Dry mouth and throat, these also signal your brain to drink. So water, most of it comes from beverages, but there are some foods that are very high in water. I used to think that watermelon has the most water content, but actually it's cucumber. So what is it here? 97% of the cucumber is just water. This is quite crazy, but this is things that you already know. What you probably didn't think about is that water also comes from metabolic reactions in your body, and so 10 to 14% of your daily needs in terms of fluids, they will come from the hydrolysis reaction in metabolism, and those are happening in your body, right? Okay, how much water should we drink? I asked in class how many glasses of water do you think people need, and people mostly answered 8. Well, that's not true. Okay, the DRI for water is different between male and female. Men usually tend to need 3.7 liters per day. Women need 2.7 liters. This is crazy amounts. Very hard to drink all this during the day, and it's more than 8 bottles for sure. Okay, 8 cups. Sorry. And obviously this varies with age, gender, well, most sex, not gender. Age, body size, health status, physical activity level. Obviously, if you're working out more, then this is higher. If you're working out less, then this is the DRI for you. If it's too hot, then you need more water. If you're too old, your requirement for body fluids is probably lower. And so these are things that we need to take into account when thinking about the DRI for water. Okay, well, not just water, for pretty much anything. In this graph here, I'm just showing you what happens with the intake and the elimination of water. And so if you're trying to get 3,000 milliliters of water in your body, 1.3 cups will come from metabolic water. So this is the hydrolysis reaction I just told you about. Food also has water in it, so about 2 cups will provide water. Well, food will provide about 2 cups of water. Most of the rest will come from the beverages you drink. Okay, and obviously this kind of moves depending on your metabolic rate, depending on many different things, depending on the type of food you're drinking, the beverage you're drinking. But in general, about 7 cups of water will go out as urine, and this is just the method of elimination of body fluids. Part of it will go through the skin and lungs. So when you're exhaling, you're not just exhaling CO2, you're exhaling these vapors, let's say, which contain water in them. The skin, when you're sweating, also will release a little bit of body fluid, and feces also contain a little bit of water. Now obviously this here can change when you have, for example, diarrhea and whatnot. The amount of the water content is kind of different. Okay, so this is not set in stone, it's just a general idea of the distribution of water in your intake and in the elimination of water. Can you get too much water? Yes, you can become overhydrated. It's very hard to do, but it can be done. Okay, there's a football player that actually died from drinking too much water during a game. As I told the class, I'll try to find the article and then maybe I'll post it. There is a lady that tortured her son by making them drink water non-stop. At some point the kid just shut down, and this happens usually, crazy people out there, but this basically happens due to the dilution of electrolytes in your blood, right? So if you start playing with the amount of volume of fluids in your body, you will affect the concentration of different electrolytes, one of them being sodium. And sodium is very important for your blood pressure, and so if you dilute it, you're decreasing its amount, and that leads to something called hyponatremia. If you have hyponatremia, your body will not be able to conduct nerve impulses properly and contract muscles properly, and additionally this will affect your blood pressure. Okay. So I've been talking about these different electrolytes. Now let's talk about how much you need of each of them, and what happens when you don't have enough of them, and what happens when you have too much of them. Okay, just like we did for water, and I just told you that overhydration is actually possible but quite rare. Dehydration, on the other hand, is fatal. Okay, so this is more, dehydration is actually more possible than overhydration. So these numbers is just for you guys to know. You don't need to know them by heart. I just want to bring your attention to sodium. So 1.5 grams of daily per day of sodium is the recommended intake. 1.5 grams is like it's almost nothing. So you can imagine now, if you're making soup or whatever and you're adding 2 spoons or 1 spoon, this is a crazy amount. Okay, so we're obviously eating too much sodium. This is a big risk in heart attacks. Okay, so sodium, major positively charged electrolyte found outside of the cell. As I mentioned earlier, it plays a role in blood pressure and acid-base balance, controls muscle contraction and relaxation, nerve impulses. It helps in glucose absorption through those sodium glucose transporters, which are found in the intestine, right? In terms of numbers, the adequate intake of sodium per day is 1.5 grams. The tolerable upper intake is anything above 2.3 grams a day. If you take more sodium than you should be, this will increase your blood pressure. Additionally, what's dangerous about sodium is that, or actually more like salt, is that people become less and less sensitive to it. And so when you're eating something that is quite salty, you won't feel that it has a lot of salt compared to other people. And so it's because your body gets used to kind of the salt, and then anything without salt then becomes kind of weird at taste. But if you take too much salt, then your normal food that is salted properly will probably taste for you like it's not salted, and that's what's dangerous about this. Okay, your body becomes used to it, and then makes you take more and more and more salt. Okay, if you take too much calcium on top of increasing your blood pressure and affecting many different things in your body, it can also lead to a bone loss because of the calcium that will be excreted, and this is just a reaction mechanism of your body to kind of decrease the acidity in your blood. Okay, because sodium, the ion, actually plays a role in the acidity of your blood. Okay, so calcium will come and kind of buffer that. Obviously, foods that are processed are high in salt, and if we take a look at this here, this one, for 1 cup, it has 1.5 grams of sodium. So just this one thing here has your adequate intake for the day. I'm not sure what this is, but probably this is like a food that you eat if you can't cook and you're a student and you're living in the dorms and whatnot. So this one pot here, usually it's those soups, right? What is it called, Campbell or some stuff like this. Obviously this is not it, but they have a lot of salt in them, and just this one here is enough for your day. Anything more will be playing with the upper tolerable intake limit. Too much is called hypernatremia. This affects this will cause high blood volume, high blood pressure, edema, because your body will have too much salt, and so your what do you call it? Your fluids will be leaving the cells to kind of fill the space outside of the cell, because if you remember, sodium is found extracellularly mostly. Certain people that have congestive heart failure or kidney disease cannot excrete sodium, so they are more at risk of hypernatremia, and then obviously of these. If you have too little sodium in your blood, in your system, then this is called hyponatremia, and this can happen through, for example, vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, and usually when you have low sodium levels, your blood pressure will decrease, and that will lead to dizziness, fatigue, nausea, headaches, and whatnot. Additionally, muscle cramps. So as I told you, the electrolytes play a big role on the muscle contraction, and obviously if you don't treat this, well, the next thing is seizures, coma, and death. Okay. Adults, healthy adults like you and me, we're not that at risk of this, because we know when to drink, right? And we know when to replenish the body. But let's say, for example, you have a kid that's 1 year old, and that kid is a little bit sick, and he's vomiting or whatnot. He can lose a lot of the sodium from his body, but he won't know how to tell you, I want to drink, right? And so this is dangerous for kids mostly. It happens mostly in kids, and elderly. The elderly, it's the same thing, right? They kind of become like kids at an older age. They lose the ability to take care of themselves, and so this is at risk mostly in the infants and elderly, right? So let's look at the mechanism. If you have too much sodium, there will be an increase in the extracellular fluid volume, because water will be leaving the cells to kind of follow the high levels of sodium. That will increase the blood pressure and the plasma, because of the plasma volume. Then your blood pressure, because it's high, it's going to exert a higher mechanical force on the heart. That will be detected by these receptors, which are found between cells of your heart, called the stretch receptors. If you remember, the gap junctions between the cells hold the cells together. Now, if you have a higher pressure, you're going to kind of have this mechanical effect on it, and this will produce a signaling cascade, which will trigger the release of this atrial natriuretic hormone, which will tell your kidneys to excrete sodium and water, right? Too much sodium, too much water, so we need to excrete it. So we'll use this NAH hormone to tell the kidneys there's too much blood volume, let's reduce it, and let's reduce it by excreting sodium and water. On the opposite end, if you have low sodium, you have low extracellular fluid volume, and you have low blood pressure, right? Because the water is actually going inside the cells, so there's less in the extracellular matrix. Because of that, your kidneys will detect this through these baroreceptors, these pressure receptors, and release the renin, which then undergoes the whole cascade that I just showed you previously: renin, angiotensin, aldosterone. So here, stretch receptors detect high levels of sodium. How do they do that? They do that because the high levels of sodium will affect the blood pressure, and if the blood pressure increases, that means the heart is working harder. There's a mechanical effect on the heart, and that will activate those stretch receptors. The opposite, you have these baroreceptors, these pressure receptors, which are found in the kidney, and they will detect low levels of sodium because of the low blood pressure. Low blood pressure affects the pressure of your arteries and whatnot, and so that is detected by the baroreceptors. Okay. Potassium is also positively charged, just like sodium, but this one is found intracellularly. Together with potassium, they maintain the fluid balance. These are the most concentrated in your body, and because of that they have a great effect on fluid balance across the membrane, and they also play an important role in, as I said, nerve impulses, contraction of muscles. Interestingly, potassium, when you have too much of it, when you take too much of it, it's good to lower blood pressure. And so if you have, for example, a person that has a high blood pressure, one way to decrease their blood pressure is by taking too much potassium. And this actually helps kind of bring the water back from outside the cell inside the cell. Because imagine this, you're taking too much sodium, and so the water will go outside of the cell, because sodium is found outside the cell. Water will follow the higher concentration of sodium, which is outside. Now if you increase the amount of potassium, potassium is inside the cell, and so now water will try to go back inside the cell, and this will lead to kind of a balance between the two. Okay, so if you have high blood pressure, one way to decrease it is by taking potassium. Okay, where do you find potassium? Fruits, mostly, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, you name it, just the regular stuff you've been hearing about, the healthy foods since the beginning of the semester. The recommended intake is about 4.7 grams a day. This should keep most people healthy. And then processed foods that have processed food are not good for you because they increase the sodium content, because obviously salt tastes good, and decrease the potassium content. And so you can see how this can be dangerous if potassium is important for keeping lower blood pressure, and sodium can increase blood pressure. So if you increase sodium and you decrease potassium, then that's a recipe for disaster. Okay. Just like for sodium, you can have too much potassium. In sodium, it's called hyponatremia. So potassium, it's called hyperkalemia. And this can play a role in, it affects basically your heart. Pretty much everything related to these affects your heart, because they affect the body fluids, and so they affect the blood pressure. Okay, so potassium on top of that can lead to irregular heartbeats. Why? Because it decreases blood pressure, and if it decreases blood pressure, your heart kind of is pumping at a weird pace. It can lead to a heart attack, death, and affecting the rhythm of your heart rate, of the blood pumping. For example, in people that have kidney disease, which is the one that kind of filters, excretes, or kind of keeps these electrolytes, they're unable to regulate potassium effectively, and so they have to avoid potassium-containing salts. They have to avoid potassium-containing salt substitutes or high potassium foods, because they can undergo hyperkalemia, because their body is not excreting the potassium, the excess potassium, and that can lead to these problems. Okay. Hypokalemia, the opposite, when you have too low, when you don't have enough potassium. Again, this is found in people that have kidney disease and diabetic ketoacidosis. It can happen when you're taking too much diuretics. So these are just compounds that make you kind of eliminate more water, or when you have extreme dehydration, and can lead to changes in your heart rate, to confusion, muscle weakness, and whatnot. And this is just because potassium has an effect on your blood pressure. It has an effect on your ability to contract muscles and whatnot. When you're drinking too much alcohol, then you're just vomiting, you're losing a lot of potassium, and that can lead to the changes in your heart rate. And if you've ever drank before and you vomited the next day, you feel the hangover, well, part of it is because you lost potassium and your heart is just feeling kind of weird. Okay, this is if you've kind of intoxicated yourself to the point where you vomited from a crazy night, let's say. Chloride. Now we're moving on to the negatively charged ions, the anions. And so it's present in higher concentration outside of the cell. helps with digestion because chloride is a component of hydrochloric acid, and so when your gastric cells are making the hydrochloric acid, they require chloride. It helps in the immune system, and it helps in the transmission of the nerve impulses. The recommended intake is 2.3 grams a day, and then if you have too much chloride, that can play a role in blood pressure as well, just like the others. If you don't have too much, this is rare but can happen through dehydration, for example, vomiting or eating disorders. Okay. The primary source, the salt, right? The salt that you eat gives you sodium and chloride. The other one is phosphorus. Now, phosphorus is a negatively charged electrolyte as well, but this one is found inside the cell. So you have sodium and chloride outside. Sodium is the positive, chloride is the negative. Inside the cell you have potassium, which is positive, and phosphorus, which is negative, okay, in terms of charge. And so phosphorus is also required for the fluid balance. It plays a role in bone formation, and obviously you know that phosphorus is important for making ATP, for making DNA, for making RNA, phospholipids, lipoproteins, and so this is a major component of your cells. So obviously if you don't have enough of it, it's a problem, or if you have too much of it, it's a problem. Additionally, phosphorus can play an important role in the reactions of phosphorylation and dephosphorylation, which we learned last lecture, and these are important for activating and deactivating enzymes. The recommended dietary intake for phosphorus is 700 milligrams a day, so you don't need much of it, and it's found pretty much in most foods. Specifically, animal sources have the most, like milk, meat, eggs, and whatnot. If you have too much, which happens again in people with kidney disease, they cannot excrete it properly, for example, or when you take vitamin D supplements, this can cause muscle spasms and convulsions. Okay. If you have too little of it, this is quite rare because most of the things you eat have phosphorus, and so it's very rare to get a deficiency in it. Usually it's another deficiency that's going to affect you before the deficiency in phosphorus affects you. Okay. Disorders. So a few more slides, but almost done. Some disorders, so there are a lot of disorders that are linked to fluid balance. I'm just going to talk about 4 here because I don't want to spend 3-4 hours talking about these. But you can think about these ions' role in pretty much all the processes in your body, and you can see that if it's not balanced properly, then you will affect those cells, right? And so you can imagine that this is just a simple list of disorders that can occur due to fluid and electrolyte imbalance, but there's hundreds of them for sure. First one, dehydration. So dehydration is when you lose too much fluid. Okay, this happens usually due to many things. For example, high intensity exercise, or sometimes there are countries that are quite hot. For example, my country, sometimes it can reach up to 45 degrees midday. And so if you, for example, go outside at 2 p.m., you'll see that there's almost nobody in the street because you don't want to stay out there. That will lead to excess fluid loss, and you can actually faint from there. Okay. Additionally, low fluid consumption. If you're like me, you tend to forget to drink, and this is visible on me. That you'd see that like my lips are like kind of become chapped. This is because of low fluid consumption, so you have to be careful with this. Sometimes when people are working out, they forget to drink water, and so this can lead to dehydration. Obviously, the kids, as I told you, if they are sick when they are younger and they're vomiting and whatnot, as you know, a kid when it's growing up, it does not have the immune system that you have today, and so it has to build it, and so it's more susceptible to infections, and the infections usually will lead the kid to vomit, have diarrhea and whatnot, and so this can lead to dehydration. The problem with this is that, as I told you previously, the kids cannot tell you, I want to drink, or they don't know that they need to drink, and so they are more at risk of this than healthy adults like you and myself. And the same theory applies to elderly. Elderly, they become like infants, and so they're also at increased risk of dehydration. And this is dangerous because you can pretty much die from this. Okay. If you've ever asked yourself if your urine color is good, usually you try to keep it between 2, 3, and 4. That means you have a proper fluid balance in your body. If it reaches this point, you might want to consult. If you've ever had a crazy night outside partying and then the next day you're kind of hangover dead, it will be around this 7 here. Okay. And maybe I'll ask you on the exam why. Test you out. Heat stroke. Heat stroke will happen because of the body's inability to regulate heat. And so when you're in hot and humid environments, just as I told you previously, your body will start changing the balance of fluids or the proportions of fluids in different compartments, let's say. Okay. And so heat stroke, usually you have a rapid pulse, you have a hot and dry skin, your body temperature will increase, and you can lose consciousness. As I told you just a second ago, there are some countries where it's extremely hot and you can actually lose consciousness because of the increase in your blood pressure. That leads to basically your body shutting down. Can be fatal. This can kill you. And obviously this is common sense. Just stop exercising if you're feeling dizzy, lightheaded, disoriented, or if you're walking outside at 2 p.m. And it's extremely hot and you're starting to feel like it's not going well, then just get in the shade and kind of stop working out, because this is quite dangerous. People that come from the Middle East, North Africa and whatnot, they are quite aware of this. You grow up with your parents telling you it's not the time to go out because it's extremely hot outside, because there were cases where people lost consciousness and even died from the extreme heat. Okay. What's at the basis of this? Your ability to sweat and your ability to regulate the heat through the body fluids. Okay. Hypertension, do I need to repeat this? I think I talked about this a lot, but a little bit of additional information. The people that are at a higher risk of hypertension usually are the ones that have kidney disease, okay, because they cannot regulate their blood volume and whatnot properly. And so hypertension is due to an unbalance of your electrolytes, and that can increase the risk for heart disease, stroke, and even damaging your kidneys. It can reduce brain function. Obviously, nerve impulses depend on a proper balance of these electrolytes, but additionally the pressure of your blood can affect brain function. Obviously, if you're putting too much pressure on your brain, that will affect the function. It can impair physical mobility and even cause death. These numbers here are your systolic and diastolic pressure that will be taking if you go to the hospital or to the doctor. And these numbers are for a high hypertension. So if you go above these numbers, usually that means you have hypertension. You don't need to know them by heart. This is just for your own information. And over 50% of adults with hypertension have something called salt sensitivity. And just a little bit of salt can shoot up your pressure to an extremely high level, and that's kind of dangerous for you, right? And finally, neuromuscular disorders. Well, unbalanced electrolytes leads to problems with your nervous system and muscle function. In the extreme cases, that can lead to seizures and uncontrollable spasms from your muscles. This is quite rare. Not quite rare, but it's rare for most people, and so Usually you're more used to the muscle cramps,